Each convocation cycle, the University of Saskatchewan Senate chooses a select few individuals to receive the highest honor our institution can bestow, an honorary degree. When we organize these ceremonies, we often ask who would be the right person to introduce the honorary degree recipient. But as soon as we knew Justice Abella was confirmed, it took about 10 seconds for our president to use his presidential prerogative to say, "Look no further." So with that, I would like to call up our president and Vice Chancellor Peter Stoichev to introduce this ceremony's recipient, the Honorable Rosalie Abella.
Thank you, Julian. Eminent Chancellor, on behalf of our Senate, I present to you the Honorable Rosalie Silberman Abella. Justice Abella is one of the most influential and groundbreaking Supreme Court justices this country has ever known. Her decades-long judicial career devoted to the advancement of justice, equity, and human dignity has significantly shaped Canadian law and society. Justice Abella was born in a post-war displaced persons camp in Germany to Jewish parents who had survived Nazi concentration camps. The family came to Canada as refugees in 1950. After studying classical piano at a high level at the Royal Conservatory of Music, she embarked on a legal career, graduating with a law degree from the University of Toronto in 1970. She practiced civil and criminal litigation until 1976, when she was appointed to the Ontario Family Court. She was 29, the youngest judge in Canadian history. From 1983 to 84, From 1983 to 1984, she led a one-person federal royal commission on equality in employment, known as the Abella Commission. She coined the term and concept of employment equity to describe programs of positive remedy for discrimination in the Canadian workplace. Her report provided a groundbreaking strategy for reducing barriers in employment faced by women, visible minorities, people with disabilities, and Indigenous peoples, groups that comprise almost 2/3 of Canada's population. Justice Abella's report shaped federal law, resulting in the Federal Employment Equity Act of 1986. And her findings also fostered and supported efforts by provincial, territorial, and municipal governments, as well as some private employers, to eliminate discrimination in the workplace. Theories of equality and discrimination developed in her report were adopted in 1989 in the Supreme Court of Canada's first decision regarding equality rights under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The concepts were also adopted by the governments of New Zealand, Northern Ireland, and South Africa. In 2004, Justice Abella was appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada, becoming the first Jewish woman and the first refugee to sit on the Supreme Court bench. Justice Abella played a key role as a providing Supreme Court justice in the 2016 Daniels case, which represented huge progress for the constitutional rights of Canada's Métis people. For many Métis people, the judgment is seen as a first step in reconciliation. A highly respected authority on constitutional law and human rights law, her contributions to legal thought have been recognized around the world, and she has received many honors. She has chaired or has been a member of numerous boards, commissions, and tribunals related to equity and human rights. Justice Abella retired in 2021 after 17 years on the federal bench, and she now teaches law at Harvard University, the first Canadian jurist to be appointed to a chair at Harvard's law school. She believes equality is not about treating everyone equally, it is about accommodating differences and creating a playing field that is the same for everyone. Justice Abella has also been an inspiring mentor for many students, and I know students here as well. lawyers, and human rights advocates across this country, including at the University of Saskatchewan, where she has given guest lectures. And in addition to her brilliant intellect, she is known, as you will see, for her warmth, generous spirit, and passion for justice. Her countless judgments are suffused with her humanity. Eminent Chancellor, I present the Honorable Rosalie Silberman Abella and ask that you confer upon her the Honorary Doctor of Laws honoris causa.
This is hard not to get choked. By virtue of the authority vested in me by the legislature of the province, and with the consent of the Senate of this university, I confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, and invest you with all the powers, rights, and privileges pertaining thereto. I'll give you a hug. Thank you.
Take a few pictures. Yeah. You can't get enough pictures. It's my privilege to invite the Honorable Dr. Abella to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you all. I want to start with the families. As President Stoichev noted, there are so many friends and family here today who are just bursting with pride and enthusiasm. Can I please invite all of you to stand up and give these graduates the standing ovation they deserve? And graduates, you couldn't have done it without them, so why don't you give them a standing ovation? Family and friends. Well, what an incredible honor to be graduating with all of you this afternoon. And how lucky that we're graduating under the magic of the incomparable Peter Stoichev, supported in all things by his wife, the indispensable Catherine Worden. President Stoichev is a brilliant polymath, part literary scholar, part musician, part statesman, and all fueled by a passion for a humane universe in which justice flourishes for everyone. This commitment to passionate justice that you've heard in his speech makes him irresistible to a lawyer like me, because it recognizes that justice, not just law, is the transcendent goal if we want a fair society. And it not only belongs to everyone, everyone has a duty to protect and promote it, but especially lawyers. I know there's a lot going on out there that's troubling and frightening. And like many people, I worry about backsliding. But today is a day for celebration and hope. So let me tell you why I'm so hopeful and so grateful to Canada for how far we've come. I admit that we still have a lot to do, and smugness should never be on the national agenda. But let's focus today on why we've earned the right to feel proud of Canada's justice journey so far, and why we need to cherish the ever-increasing Canadian trajectory towards more and more inclusion, fairness, and social justice so that the next generation can look backwards and forward with the same pride and hope we feel today. As you heard, I graduated in 1970 from law school. In the decades since, I've watched justice grow up in Canada. We got official bilingualism and multiculturalism, gave persons with disabilities protected status in human rights codes, entered into serious dialogue with Indigenous people, welcomed waves of non-white immigrants, abolished the matrimonial property regime that for centuries had kept wives on an economic continuum that ranged from invisible to inconsolable, and watched women ponder competing visions of security as they made the transition to a world with options. And then, with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982, we constitutionalized the protection of rights, gave independent judges the authority to enforce them, and introduced the public to a new, uniquely Canadian justice vision. We went from being respectfully and deferentially colonial to being singularly and spectacularly independent. And now we are the world's greatest justice exporter. Having had the benefit of watching more mature democracies work their way through the conceptual challenges of modern governance, we thanked them for their example and proceeded to carve out our own unique vision, one that started where they left off, then soared into new territory. And how majestically we soared, parting company with the past and developing a robust new justice consensus that's the envy of the Western world. Where for others, pluralism and diversity are fragmenting magnets, for Canada, they are unifying. Where for others, assimilation is the social goal, for us, it represents the inequitable obliteration of the identities that define us. Where for others, treating everyone the same is the dominant governing principle, for us, it takes its place alongside the principle that treating everyone the same can result in ignoring the differences that need to be respected if we are to be a truly inclusive society. Integration based on difference, equality based on inclusion despite difference, and compassion based on respect and fairness. These are the principles that form the moral code of our national values, the values that make us the most successful practitioners of multiculturalism in the world, the values your generation has inherited, and the values whose integrity your generation's vigilant protection requires. I took and take none of this for granted. Why? 100,000 displaced persons and refugees landed at Pier 21 in Halifax after the Second World War. I was one of them. My parents had married in Poland on September the 3rd, 1939, the day World War II officially started. They spent most of the war in concentration camps. Their 2-year-old son and my father's entire family were killed. Miraculously, they both survived and ended up in Stuttgart, Germany after the war, where my father, a lawyer, taught himself English and was appointed legal counsel for displaced persons in Southwest Germany by the Americans. In 1946, shortly after my parents were liberated, I was born on July the 1st. After years of trying to get into Canada, we finally got permission. We arrived on May the 30th, 1950, as Jewish refugees. My parents were determined not to dwell on their losses, but instead to build new dreams. Within days of arriving in Toronto, my father went to the Law Society of Upper Canada to ask what tests he would need to take to become a lawyer. None, they said. Non-citizens could not be lawyers. Waiting the 5 years it took in those days to become a citizen was impossible. There was a family to feed. So he became an insurance agent for the next 20 years, happily. The moment I heard that story as a child about my father not being able to be a lawyer was the moment I decided to become one. I was 4 years old. I didn't have a clue what being a lawyer meant, but I was going to be what he couldn't be. But growing up, people told me girls weren't lawyers. Not so, said my parents. This is Canada. With hard work, anything is possible. My father died a month before I finished law school. He never lived to see his inspiration take flight in his daughter, or in his daughter's 2 sons, whom he never met, who also became lawyers. But he knew somehow it would turn out all right for his family because he was confident in Canada's generosity. My parents saw Canada as a country that respected their commitment to rebuilding a joyful family, respected their right to retain in demonstrable pride the religious identity that had attracted such brutality in Europe, and respected their hopes that life in Canada would provide peace, safety, and fairness. And how right they were. A few years ago, my mother gave me some of my father's papers from Germany. One of the most powerful documents I found was written by my father when he was head of our displaced persons camp in Stuttgart. It was his introduction of Eleanor Roosevelt when she came to visit our DP camp in 1948. He said, "We welcome you, Mrs. Roosevelt, as the representative of a great nation whose victorious army liberated the remnants of European Jewry from death and so highly contributed to their moral and physical rehabilitation. We shall never forget that aid rendered by the American people and army. We are not in a position of showing you many assets. The best we are able to produce are these few children. They alone are our fortune and our sole hope for the future." As one of those children, I am here to tell you that the gift of hope from my remarkably optimistic parents was the gift that kept right on giving through public and high school, through university, through marriage, through children and grandchildren, and through my entire and improbable career. Canada's triumphal triumvirate of opportunity, generosity, and idealism is Canada's best self. It is the Canada that let my family in, the Canada that took one generation's European horror story and turned it into another generation's Canadian fairy tale, and the Canada that took a life that started in a displaced persons camp in Germany and nurtured it all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. It could not have happened anywhere else. I am so proud to be Canadian. Thank you. Thank you. My life started in a country where there had been no democracy, no rights, no justice. No one with this history does not feel lucky to be alive and free. No one with this history takes anything for granted. And no one with this history does not feel that we have a particular duty to wear our identities with pride and to promise our children that we will do everything humanly possible to keep the world safer for them than it was for their grandparents. A world where all children, regardless of race, color, religion, or gender, can wear their identities with dignity, pride, and in peace. Graduates, may all your and your family's hopes come true. And may Canada and the University of Saskatchewan continue always to produce magnificent, humane leaders like you. President Stoichev, thank you so much for the great honor of inviting me to graduate today with these wonderful, humane leaders. Good luck to all of you. I'll be cheering for you.
Thank you, Dr. Abella.